Hey there. Hopefully at this stage you've managed to get into your ServiceAI tenant and you're probably met with something very similar to this. So what now? Well, the first and foremost thing you want to do, regardless of which PSA you have, is to connect to your PSA. That is easily done by clicking the banner. And the first thing we want to do is connect that PSA because that's the primary source of our knowledge. We're going to take your PSA tickets and bring them in here. We're going to analyze them. And that's going to give you everything from your insights to using the knowledge inside of your tickets and the notes that you have to build a base of knowledge in which we can hand the answers back out to your technicians. And if you have ConnectWise or Autotask, currently the only ones that are supported, but more are coming, we'll be able to even set up triage in the next couple minutes, really. But let's focus on the core connections. So once you're over here, make sure you hit your add integration. And again, first and foremost, you really want to set up that ticketing system, aka the PSA. Now, some of the ticketing systems have a little bit of different filters, but the general process is the same, and I'll use ConnectWise as an example. Aside from the usual authentication pieces, the two bits of information that you really want to focus on and think hard on are, if available, and you can filter by boards or queues or whatever your respective version is, think about what has the best client interaction. Those are going to give you the richest notes that are going to give us the best information on how your technicians are performing and how the clients are behaving. We're not going to be very good at generating technician etiquette scores or client CSATs if we're just reading RMM alerts or something that doesn't really get a lot of attention. So focus on the ones that have the best meat, if you will. The second thing you really want to think about is the from date. So if you're in a trial version of ServiceAI, you're only going to be able to backsync 3 months, which is plenty to see how the system works. But if you're on a paid version, you can select as far back as you like. As a general tip, I like to tell people that it's kind of like training a human. You don't necessarily want a human being trained on 7-year-old data. So if you have a lot of data, be careful with what you think about. Usually if you've had a major change, if you've really changed the processes in which you operate and you are totally different in the last 6 months or a year than you were 5 years ago, about 6 months to a year to about 2 years is the sweet spot that most people actually go for. It tends to give the best AI output and best scores that are more relevant and recent than most things. And you can always go back further. If you pull in a little bit of information, you can always keep adding to the ticket base to make your AI even smarter. But other than this, the other thing you really want to connect, if you have available, is your documentation, or aka your article system. So why is the article system important? Well, it adds a secondary layer to enrich the AI. So you may have a lot of notes and a lot of context there. Adding that article system is going to get you even more knowledge, and it can be used to link that off to technicians. So not only are they going to be able to have the summaries brought together from their notes, but the AI will also be able to provide them exactly the references to the documentation you found. So if you have a lot of documents and you have technicians that are struggling to find that document and correlate it to the right ticket, that's part of ServiceAI's deal. So we do support every single one of the PSA's respective documentation system, but very popularly, we support a couple of third-party ones like the CloudRadial UCP Documents, and very popularly as well, Hudu and IT Glue. So let's take a look at what something looks like that's been set up. Okay, so now I have a different tenant that's set up a little bit better, and what are we looking at? Well, I hooked up ConnectWise and IT Glue as an example. When you first decide everything, you can see that I've identified the board I want to pull from, or again, you can do multiple, and I chose only a couple months just to make sure that I have the right kind of flavor. I want to see how it performs. Now, when you're finished with that, the thing you want to do is you want to hit sync, and that will actually bring in the tickets from yesterday to today and every day after. That's what the sync does specifically. Once the sync is finished, and it can take, anywhere, again, depends on the specific number of tickets, but anywhere from a matter of minutes to maybe up to an hour at most, you can also, at the end of that, do the backsync. And the backsync is specifically going to start to bring in tickets from that date that you entered. And this is going to build the most comprehensive database of your tickets that we can, again, then report on and move on from. And last but not least, if you have a documentation system, you can also run the sync for that documentation system to start populating your article area. That's really all you want to do when you first start out. So how do you know if it's working? Well, if you start seeing tickets show up, you can start to see some scores populate. And the most important thing you want to think about when you look at the scores are basically, what do they mean? And you have 3 core scores that we'll talk about throughout all of the onboarding videos. You've got the ticket RPS, the agent RPS, and the user RPS. And in a nutshell, a ticket RPS is the quality of notes that we're seeing. So How are the notes read by the AI? Are they legible? Are they understandable? Did they get the idea in the picture? And if they do, you're going to have a pretty good ticket RPS. If the notes are poor or they contain fragmented information, typically you'll see a poor RPS. What about agents? Agents is a catch-all term for technicians, and we're using several different matrices to understand their score. So everything from their empathy to the responsiveness to the de-escalation tactics factors into the agent RPS. And then the user RPS is simply the end user's prickliness, right? We're seeing how they take the answers, if they're responsive, if they're nice, if they're kind of not so nice, and we're assigning them a score. So lots of different ways to interpret this data that, again, we'll see. But right now, we're just making sure things are working correctly. So you should start seeing some of the tickets trickle in as you see these scores. Last but not least, as I mentioned before, if you have Autotask or ConnectWise and you want to start playing with some stuff, you can actually set up triage right now via your settings and triage without having to wait on the tickets to sync in, because this is technically a little bit of a separate system. So stay tuned. We'll send you some tips as well on how to manage a little bit of the exclusions to prune up the tickets if you've got some stuff in there that may not be worth learning from. And I'll be sending a little bit more information and adding this to my next video on how to set up triage and how to manage that.